Hello to you and welcome to another video. So, as is often the case with these, I'm inspired by what's happened in the week, and I'm inspired by a coachee of mine that I had a session with a few days ago. And there's generally, I very rarely come out of a coaching session thinking that was just bog standard, that was just normal. There's generally something really interesting comes out of it, and it might seem quite mundane to some, but that's part of the reason why I really like it. There's something about scratching beneath the surface and understanding what's going on in a bit more detail that's just really attractive to me. But I've always liked how things work. I remember having a book like that when I was a kid, and certainly my kids have got books like that now. So yeah, so it's a bit about scratching beneath the surface, not taking things at face value, whatever you want to call it. So I was just thinking about it there before I pressed record. It's rare that things are exactly as they seem. And this was the realisation in the coaching session that I was doing the other day. So the issue that the person wanted to be coached on was about a particular meeting, or a regular group meeting that she's involved in, and she felt like she was having to take on the lion's share of the responsibility for getting work done and getting reports done and things. So really she wanted to try and figure out different strategies that she could adopt to see how she could get people to take a bit more responsibility. I think that was the word she used. And how she could try and delegate some of that responsibility to people other than herself, essentially. So reduce her workload and just feel like other people in the group are pulling their weight. So we kind of got into discussing how she might do that, and she came up with a really good idea about, instead of doing virtual meetings and circulating emails with agendas and action trackers and all that kind of stuff, she had said, I think actually what we need to do is just get everyone in the same room together. And it's much harder to not take responsibility for things if you're not kind of physically there. There is definitely an ownership gap that is created by remote meetings, without a doubt. It is a really, really effective way of bringing a lot of people together over long distances without actually having to get people in the same room together. So there are definitely advantages, but I think that is something that you lose in a remote meeting. And then we came on to something that was potentially way more interesting, but still very relevant to what we were discussing. So it became evident, she started talking about another piece of work that she's been involved in, and it's to do with actually trying to nail down and determine and document where people's roles and responsibilities lie. And this seems like a really straightforward thing that should already be in place, but for some reason it's not. And she was saying that this is something they had been working on for some time, was trying to nail down an actual framework for who's responsible for what. And you could directly relate this back to what she was talking about. So part of the issue she was having was trying to get people to take some responsibility for something, and they were saying, oh no, that's not my patch, that's X person's patch. And then you go to X person, they say, no, that's not my patch, that's Y person's patch, and so on and so forth. And effectively what you end up doing is you go around the houses and no one takes responsibility for it. And that's not out of badness, that's just purely because genuinely all these people don't think it's their responsibility, they think it's someone else's responsibility. And then to take that even slightly further, it's because in the role that they're in professionally, they just don't know what actually the full gambit of what they're responsible for and what they're not responsible for. So it's quite staggering, really. It seems like such a simple and straightforward thing to have a kind of documented explanation of what your roles and responsibilities are, that you can refer to, and then everyone else can refer to, and they can just go, right, well, we've got this issue that needs to be resolved, who's whose remit is that? And either the person, someone or the person knows, or they can consult an organisational chart of some kind and say, oh, that's the remit of this department, and then there's no argument really, or minimises the argument. I shouldn't say no argument, because there's no such thing as always or never in my mind. We have a similar thing in A&E, in the emergency department, where it comes to someone needing admission with a certain complaint. We actually have an agreed list on the wall, particularly of the things that tend to be a little bit contentious, as to whether it should be general medicine, whether it should be surgery, that kind of thing. So we have an agreed list that the higher ups within the hospital have all agreed amongst themselves that this specialty admits this specialty admits this. So we consult that if there's ever any difficulty. I mean, obviously you can't account for individual personalities from that point of view, hence why I say it's not an always or never scenario, but it does go a long way to sorting out a lot of these difficulties. There are other procedures in place to make the decision one way or the other, if there's ongoing difficulties beyond that. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting. So we scratched beneath the surface of the surface level of the problem, and actually you probably could scratch deeper into that, I suspect, but that was mainly what we had time to explore, and it was really, really interesting. It seemed to be, from my kind of perspective on it, was that it was a lot about ownership then, and just having your roles and responsibilities defined as to what's actually on your patch, what's within your remit, what are you supposed to be doing. And it's a really, really, I don't know if anyone's ever worked in an area where they were never really given a good firm list of the things that they're responsible for, but it can be quite uncomfortable. I would much rather know exactly what's my responsibility and what's not. So that's where I think just scratching beneath the surface of that allowed her to see actually where she should be focusing, what proportion of her efforts. So yes, she's going to put on this workshop to try and get people to agree to certain things, and actually get people to take responsibility, but actually there is a proportion of her time and energy that needs to be devoted into this bigger picture project to make sure that they get organisational agreement for what certain people's roles and responsibilities are, and actually that will probably have the beneficial knock-on effect that there will be less of this passing on and people not taking ownership. So that's the key lesson for me, is things are rarely as simple as they seem. And that's one of the big things I love about coaching, is that it just gives you that opportunity to scratch beneath the surface. And often you will make realisations like this, that it's bigger and broader than you thought it was. And addressing this one problem will be helpful, but actually addressing the underlying bigger picture issue is probably going to be even more fruitful for you going forward. It's a little bit like the old saying, isn't it? You give a person a fish and they'll eat for a day, or a meal probably if it was me. You give a person a fishing rod and teach them how to fish, and they'll be able to look after themselves for life. It's a little bit like that. So don't just treat the symptom, look for the underlying disease to make it into a doctorly thing. So I think that's about all I've got to say. If you think this is interesting, like the video, let me know, comment underneath, recommend the videos to other people, and I will catch up with you all soon.